Hello everybody, it is HiroTheJapaneseTrain here.
And Master of the Lemons, aka Lemmy.
And we're here with our first installment of our brand new show on TWR Community Radio called Character Gallery. And it's essentially everything that you find and don't find on the back of a character card or on the character galleries of those DVDs we grew up with and love so much, and more, as we go in depth on your favorite characters from the show.
Essentially, this show is about character analysis, and basically talking about personality traits, talking about what makes a character who they are and what's most interesting about them. Today's character is Salty. We're talking about Salty the Dockyard Diesel. And we think there are some interesting things about him that haven't really been said before or are rarely touched upon that would be interesting to bring light to. We've divided the show into two sections, the personality section and the design section. So we want to go in detail on both of those things. And we're starting with the personality section first because that's what this show focuses on. So to start with, I feel like we should do the overview on Salty. We should talk about generally how we feel about his character, what we think is most important about him, and why we like him as a character. So I'll let you go first on that, Matt.
So I kind of wrote a little snippet about Salty, and basically, here's my overview, is that Salty is a jolly sailor type who is at his happiest when he is by the sea, telling stories to whomever will hear and singing songs as he goes about his work.
That makes it sound like Salty, like he's desperately trying to tell people. Like he's like, please
won't you hear my story?
Listen to me. They're very good. Like he's pushing his book on people, like that. Yeah, no, I very much agree with that overview, though. I mean, that's who Salty is. I think one of Salty's greatest and most obvious qualities is just that he's really jovial and friendly. So I would say that about Salty is a big quality, is just that he's so friendly and happy and jovial all the time, even in situations where somebody else might get upset, like when Gordon's a huge jerk and says, something along the lines of like, oh, don't get me all sooty, and, an express engine would never do the work you do, that sort of thing, where he's just a huge jerk.
Oh, there's
Salty,
Gordon takes a tumble where he yells at Salty at the yards.
Yeah, he yells at him, and that's the thing, is that Salty doesn't, Gordon's just a huge jerk, and he's really, highly inconsiderate and arrogant, and Salty doesn't even stop smiling. Like, he's obviously irked by what Gordon says, but he doesn't say, he's more like, well, it's a sooty job, but you wouldn't know. But, he says it like under his breath. He's not confrontational.
Well, the great thing about Salty is, even when he is wronged like that, he's just so quick to forgive. Like, he instantly forgives, holds no grudges, is so compassionate and good-natured that you never doubt for a second that he's coming from the best intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really just one of the strongest qualities, because you can never feel manipulated by him.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, and at the end of Gordon Takes a Tumble too, I love that even though Salty, how he responded to Gordon was so vanilla, and it was not even really harsh the way that he confronted Gordon. He at the end he still apologizes, not on screen, but they say like, Salty's sorry he teased you, and it's like, Salty, you didn't need to apologize. Gordon was a massive jerk, but he still apologizes because he's Salty. That's what he does. He's the bigger man in every situation. That's who Salty is, and I just love that he is that. It's such a cool character, because we're constantly surrounded by confrontational, abrasive characters in Thomas. Like, that's most of the characters. So when somebody is as patient and kind as Salty is, it means a lot. And actually that feeds into our first point. We have a few questions that we've asked each other, and we're supposed to come to the table with our answers. And I'll just read them off right now. We've got, what is the character's greatest virtue? What is their greatest flaw? What is their defining moment? Like, out of everything, the books, the show, Salty wasn't in the books, but, just the whole show, what moment best defines this character out of everything? We have the related characters, so who are their friends, who are their enemies? What characters most profoundly impact the character we're talking about, Salty in this case? And what is the most underappreciated element of the character? So like Salty, what does the fandom in general seem to appreciate the least about Salty? What is there that seems to go overlooked? And so Matt and I will probably have quite different answers to those. Or maybe similar answers. I don't know. We tend to agree on a lot of things.
Yeah.
But yeah. So for the greatest virtue, I was about to say. I just wanted to jump on it because it came up in conversation.
Go ahead.
Is that I consider Salty's greatest virtue to be his. It's hard to describe it. I would say tolerance plus patience. Like he's an incredibly tolerant and forgiving character. Like the best way I can describe it is that when somebody insults him, if he can just sit back and take it, he will. He's not going to confront them. He's not going to get in an argument with them.
Salty makes everybody around him feel better about themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And he really, but I would say that, so Salty is incredibly tolerant and patient. And he'll just sit there and bite his tongue if somebody is being a jerk to him. If he knows that it'll pass over soon, it'll blow over, then he's just gonna sit through it. He's got a lot of self-control and restraint, and he's not gonna freak out at somebody ever. He's just gonna kind of awkwardly sit there and just be like, all right, can we talk about something else? It's like he's in that situation.
Well, my answer to this question is kind of similar to yours, Lemmy, but mine kind of focuses on a different side of him, is his selflessness and understanding, because we've never seen him angry at anyone. Really. He bottles up so much and takes so much from the goodness of his heart, even if that means, the job that he loves to do by the sea. Because twice now, or at least a few times in the show, when he first came, he took the quarry job without complaining. And then when...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and then when Porter arrives, Salty never takes it out on him, even if it meant permanently giving up his job by the sea.
Yeah, no, that's
a
great example. I didn't even think about that one. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't, think about, we have so many occasions where usually it's a diesel replacing a steam engine or, purportedly about to replace a steam engine. But it's the same situation where an engine feels threatened, and so they get mad at the engine that's coming in, and they're like, well, I don't want you anywhere near here. You're going to replace us or whatever. And, and it's that happens with James's... prejudice towards diesel.
Happens with Hugo.
Yeah, it happens when Hugo comes in, as everyone's like, he's going to replace us. And so it says a lot about an engine that they don't feel threatened. Salty, I think, he in that episode, he fully believes that Porter is going to replace him. However, he realizes Porter isn't a bad engine. So he's not going to take it out on him. He's like, he realizes this is a difficult situation for Porter too. And he fears him. Sure, he's worried about being replaced, but he doesn't get mad at Porter. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to Porter. He would much rather just accept the fact that it's the end of the line for him, because he would never want to destroy somebody else's life.
He would rather spend the rest of his life in a quarry than to even come close to stepping on anyone's toes.
Yeah, exactly. Salty probably realizes how lucky he is to be on Sodor and have work, rather than ending up in a scrapyard or something, or ending up somewhere else. Sodor is a safe place for him, and he's been given a home here. He realizes he's lucky to be here, and he doesn't want to ask for too much, and so he just accepts it. He doesn't even ask to be taken to the sea, right? But then, because he's so kind and sweet, and because he's so grateful, he gets what he deserves, which is to be by the sea, because he deserves that. And that's what's great about it.
I will say, I had a hard time finding his worst, I had a hard time finding Salty's flaws.
Yeah, his greatest flaw. Yeah, I actually found it pretty quickly. But I'm very curious to hear what you have, so you go first.
Mine is kind of simple, but it's more just, it's an excess flaw. It's so, what I mean by that is Salty's sensitivity sometimes gets him hurt more easily than others.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't choose that, but I wanted to talk about it a lot. Is that I feel like people a lot of the time get this sense that Salty's this. Well, the song says it, that the Down by the Dock says he's the tough guy, and it's like, he's not the tough guy. It's like he's that
70-year-old fisherman that just looks sad by the pier if you say something mean to him.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's quite sensitive. It's like, the what's it called? The Salty
Stormy Tale.
Yeah, that's a really great example of Salty's character. I love that episode, because think about what happens there. Salty overhears Thomas and Percy making fun of him, and that alone is enough to really fundamentally upset him, profoundly. And it really hurts his feelings that he's always been so kind to them. He's never said a negative thing to them once, never mocked them, and then they do this, and it's like he feels a little bit betrayed, and it's really sad. I really feel for him there, because it's like, and also another thing is I really respect that Salty shows his emotions. He doesn't hide anything. He's so honest. It's clear that he's upset. Emily goes up to him and asks him, like, what's wrong? And he doesn't tough it out like the quote-unquote tough guy would. He's just like, nobody wants to be made fun of by silly tank engines. And it's such an interesting line, too. Because he's clearly upset. He's clearly, like, even a little bit bitter and angry about it. However, he doesn't confront Thomas and Percy on it. That's the main thing.
It is funny that he told it to Emily, because knowing what Emily would do with that information.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think Salty can be maybe a little bit too trusting sometimes, too.
Yeah.
And can get hurt because of it. Because, like, with Thomas and Percy, I think part of that is he trusted them never to make a joke like this. And so he didn't realize that they would do it. And it was probably really upsetting for him when he realized that they were capable of upsetting him like this. He's so open, and he is so sensitive that it gets to him sometimes. And not like he's a mess. Like, he's not. He's got it very much under control. However, he can have his feelings hurt. He's a lot more sensitive than somebody like Gordon or James or, Now, he won't go off like they will under any circumstances. They go off more than he does, but I feel like they're less sensitive. I feel like they're less profoundly hurt and more insulted. Gordon gets huffy when somebody insults him or says something like that. Salty just gets sad and then bites his tongue and doesn't say anything and hopes it passes. He waits for the storm to pass. And that's just such a...
He's never offended on an ego level is the thing. It's like, if you said the same thing to Gordon, you know that you could just laugh it off and Gordon would blow up in your face. But if you say it to Salty, you're worried that he'll just, be back in the sheds just sad all evening.
And I think also he's just more clearly feels. A lot of engines, Gordon would never dare show that he was sad. And I think a lot of the time, even when he is made sad, he acts disgraced instead, because he can't handle expressing his emotions that way. It's beneath him. He doesn't like feeling that way, so he hides
It's worth saying
Salty shows it.
Yeah, it's worth saying that Salty's flaw, the one that I chose at least, wouldn't be a flaw if not for the engines around him.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that,
he can't control it.
Yeah, and he is not alien to his emotions at all. He feels them full force. But at the same time, he lets he knows when to let something go. And he lets things go. Actually, this leads into my greatest flaw for Salty, which is that I think he lets too much go. I think Salty doesn't stand up for himself. That's what I would say Salty's greatest flaw is he'll stand up for himself to some extent sometimes. Like, I really think like say somebody like Edward never defends himself. Edward literally will just take somebody else's crap, and that'll be that. Whereas Salty will defend himself sometimes, but not nearly as much as he should. He always, his default is let's let it blow over. Let's not dwell on this, right? Gordon is just so outrageously rude, and Gordon takes a tumble that Salty has to say something, but even then, I don't think Gordon gets to Salty in that. I think Salty just finds it ridiculous how arrogant Gordon is.
Salty's more comfortable speaking up to someone like Gordon than Thomas and Percy.
Yeah, I would say that, because he trusts Thomas and Percy to be kinder. But Gordon, he's, not surprised.
So what, then, would you say is his defining moment?
I would say it's that Salty's Stormy Tale moment.
I agree. We're on the same page, and we've talked about it for so long. I was like, I knew it. Because it's like...
Yeah.
Just this immediate forgiveness, and, the sadness he feels is just really heartbreaking. And I think that the whole episode, I'm kind of processing it now, just when he's fixing the lighthouse with Fergus. It's really interesting how that's also symbolic of the way that he lets the storm pass him.
Yeah, that's true.
And he just he lets all that fly over him and then takes care of it. But it's kind of funny, because then you think about when Porter arrives, and Porter's whole philosophy is, water off a duck's back, don't let stuff bother you. Salty does that, but not to quite the extent, because stuff will bother him. He'll let stuff bother him, but...
Yeah. I think Porter can legitimately let stuff go. Salty lets stuff go in that he doesn't confront the person who wronged him. However,
Yeah.
he doesn't let it go emotionally. It still gets to him. He still feels bad. But his response, rather than actually talking it out with whoever hurt his feelings, he's instead like, well, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to turn this into a thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna feel sad for a few days and be bummed that Thomas and Percy think my accent is weird, and then I'll get over it because I know I can because I'm a strong person, and then I'll be fine in a few days. And that's how Salty interacts with the world, I think, is that, and I don't think he gets upset all that often because, usually he's not surrounded. Think about where he is. He's on Edward's branch line. He's at Brenda. And he's surrounded by the nicest engines in the world. Edward and Boko run that line. Bill and Ben can be maybe inconsiderate sometimes, and I feel like they've maybe hurt Salty's feelings before. However, they're
But Salty, I do think he loves Bill and
yeah,
Ben,
no.
deep
I
down.
look at him kind of like he's like their cool uncle.
Yeah,
That's really what he's like. They come to him for the stories and he's so exciting and interesting, and it's like that's really what he's about. And in fact, this is bleeding right into our related characters. That fits perfectly. Is that I think the characters that are best associated with Salty are Edward and Boko, like I said, because they're running the line, like they're around him, right? And we've almost never seen Boko obviously interact with Salty, and we've seen Edward interact with him very sparingly. However, I think that the potential is definitely there for them to interact, and I assume that they do because they work in the exact same place. Like Salty is at Brendam, he's fairly isolated there. However, he's surrounded by the characters that do come there. So that's Edward and Boko who run the line. Occasionally other characters too, like maybe every once in a while Thomas and Percy come down there. James will be on Edward's branch running it sometimes when they need help. Donald and Douglas occasionally. Generally, it would be Edward, Boko, Bill, Ben. Porter, I think, would probably be Salty's closest friend because the two of them are working together all the time. And then Cranky, yeah, I was about to say Cranky next. Is that
Cranky more so than Porter, even in
I was gonna say that. However, I think Cranky and Salty have a way more profound relationship.
Yeah.
I think the Porter is more of a friend to Salty.
Right.
Because Cranky's kind of like, I feel like Salty and Cranky almost care more about each other. Cranky, that wouldn't show it, right? Cranky just kind of brushes it off, and he's like, oh, whatever, and he's like, but I think there would be little moments that would show he really does care about Salty.
Yeah.
And deep down, he feels so isolated and alone sometimes because of, firstly, his position, but secondly, just he feels like nobody really cares because there's constantly ships coming and going, engines just like expecting him to load their trains, and that's that. And Salty's the only one who kind of checks in with Cranky. I feel like Edward and Boko do too occasionally, but Salty's really there the whole day. Kind of like, how are you doing, Cranky? And Cranky's just like, oh, whatever, Salty. I just shut my trucks, And then it's like, I think deep down, Cranky's really, really grateful that Salty does check in and cares about him and actually pulls him out of his shell. Because Cranky is Cranky, right? He doesn't want to interact with stuff. He doesn't want to interact with anybody, really. He just wants to kind of get through the day. But Salty pulls him out of his shell and makes him experience life and makes him have friends, It's and that I think means a lot to Cranky, even if he doesn't ever say it.
Right.
And so and likewise, Salty I think just really cares about Cranky. He sees the heart of gold that Cranky has. I don't remember what episode Salty says this, but he says Cranky has a heart of gold. I think it's Kevin's Cranky Friend. Is where Salty's like, and Salty, he's smiling the whole time. He's not wary at all about what he's saying. He's totally 100% confident, beneath all that metal lies a heart of gold. And he's like, he just knows that, right? Because he knows who Cranky is. Even when Cranky doesn't want him to. Cranky does everything in his power to be like, no, I don't care. I'm just busy with my work. Don't bug me. But, but Salty knows who he is. He is right about who Cranky is. And I think deep down Cranky appreciates that Salty understands him. And I think Salty understands Cranky better than anybody else in the world does. And I think that makes their relationship probably the closest. But I wouldn't say close. I would say most profound. I think Salty and Porter are closer with each other. I say, but
Salty and Porter are because it is interesting. I forget what the story was, where Porter was talking about how he initially couldn't sleep because of Salty snoring.
Yeah.
But then
I think that's a
now
shed
he
for
needs it.
I think that's a shed for Edward.
Yeah. It's still a nice moment, though.
Yeah, that moment in and of itself. That whole episode, actually, I think is fantastic, apart from one, I can't stand the bouncing. And two, the ending is atrocious, because Edward would never leave his friends like that. However, apart from that, the whole episode is actually pretty great. But anyway, yeah, that's a great example of that. It's like, I think Porter and Salty, that friendship isn't as profound as what Salty and Cranky have. Even though, day-to-day, Porter and Salty have a better interaction. So that's what I'd say about that. And I think that's pretty much everybody that's important to... Well, actually, what I do love is Salty's connection with Harvey and Murdoch. I adore that.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Because the thing is, it's... You've got Salty and Harvey. I have no idea why they're shedded where they are. I don't even want to think about that. But just character-wise, right? We've got Murdoch, Harvey, and Salty in the same shed. Firstly, I can see them really getting along. Harvey knows what it's like to have his feelings hurt, and Harvey in and of himself is actually quite sensitive. If Harvey had met Salty on the first day, well, technically he did because he was there at the docks, but really gotten to know him the first day, I think Harvey would have had a much easier time. And I think there's no coincidence the two gravitated towards each other and share a shed like that. Because the Salty probably makes Harvey feel very comfortable here. And Harvey is so considerate and kind that he makes Salty feel comfortable. So the two of them make perfect sense to be friends with each other. And then when Murdoch comes in, Murdoch just wants some peace and quiet. Murdoch just, he just wants,
I highly relate with that level of sensory overload that comes from Salty and Harvey.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're very, because they're both very bubbly, Mm-hmm. And I feel like Salty brings Harvey out of his shell a little bit, but once he does, the two of them are very loud, and especially Salty is loud. However, and so at first, Murdoch is very annoyed by them, naturally. However, once he gets to know them, I feel like it makes sense that they would all become really close friends. Because Salty, again, these are really considerate characters. Like, Salty and Harvey are way more considerate and relate way more to feeling... they're way more honest about their feelings than a lot of characters are. And so Harvey and Salty gravitate towards each other for that reason. And then when Murdoch comes in, compared to engines like Gordon and Henry and James, he is a lot calmer and a lot less... He's not ridiculous like they are. And he can relate to wanting to get away from that ridiculousness. He can relate to Salty under his breath being like, not that you would know, about Gordon, right? Yeah. He can relate to that kind of behavior because he himself is he's on the outside looking in. The three of them are always on the outside looking in. They're part of that club of characters on the island that just look at the ridiculous stuff that Gordon and Henry and James and Thomas and all these characters do. And they're just like, are you serious? Are you really going to do that? And the three of them can relate that way. And that's why they work so well together and why they would become friends. And once Murdoch realizes that Salty's high energy doesn't correlate to him being rude in any way, then they get along great because you can see where he's coming from.
I'm sure that on Murdoch's first day, where he had encountered Thomas and all these other engines getting in his face and seeing all the conflict, that he comes into the shed and he's like, oh god, these Sudrian engines are too much for me.
Yeah.
So he thinks he's going to get from Salty and Harvey the same stuff that Thomas gave him, and then he's like, oh, well, nope, I messed up. These guys are definitely my friends.
Yeah. He still doesn't want any of that energetic business, right? So Salty can drive Murdoch crazy. But it's interesting because they're still very good friends and quite close, I think, because they share a shed. And so because of that, you've got this interesting dynamic where it's like Salty will drag Murdoch. I'm imagining Salty would drag Murdoch into tons of different ridiculous situations. And really, Salty would have a really interesting life where he does all this stuff. And Murdoch would just be like, can we not, please? And then Salty's like, no, but it'll be a great idea, and we'll do this and this. And he's just like, come on! And he makes a good argument, and Murdoch's like, all right. And then he regrets it later. And that's and I think that's what can be so great about that friendship. So I think that's... so I would say Murdoch and Harvey are also important characters to Salty. Them, plus everyone I listed before, Bill, Ben, Cranky, Porter, Edward, Boko, I say all of them are Salty's closest related characters and the most significant to him. So the last thing we have for the personality section is the most underappreciated element of Salty's character, or of Salty in general? Like, what do you think, Matt, is the thing that is least appreciated, that people really seem to notice the least about Salty, when really it deserves to be noticed?
Well, I think people generally, and it's not, it's not their fault at all. I think people just get caught up in the sort of piratey, yo-ho, seaside storytelling
that is true.
side of things.
I feel like there's not a lot of depth in the way that he's seen sometimes, where he...
It's very easy to make him a caricature and just kind of let that be his whole archetype. But I think that Salty's selflessness and deep affection for the railway, just the way that he interacts with the others and has this incredibly powerful support and love for everybody around him.
Yeah, I adore that. He's this like social kind of he puts everyone at ease. That's what he tries to do in every single situation. He tries to calm everybody down, make everybody happy, tell a few jokes, tell a story, just make everybody peaceful. He wants peace. That's what Salty tries to do. I think that's one of the biggest things about him, is that he just tries to bring peace to a situation where there's constant fighting and bickering on this island. And Salty just wants everyone to get along and be peaceful. So I would say that is an underappreciated thing. I would say, honestly, one thing that almost nobody seems to have tapped that I think is really interesting is Salty seems to have this really fascinating past. Like, it seems like there's a lot to him. Like, I feel like his most interesting years are before he came to Sodor. It sounds like he's been all over the place, all over Britain, maybe all over the world, to different harbors. I feel like he's been places.
Big world, big adventures. The story is Salty.
Oh my god!
Let's go!
Like, I'm picturing, like, maybe he was built. Once he was built, maybe first he was exported to Italy or something. And then he traveled to India, and then he traveled... Like, he was sent to different harbors. Just by chance, had a really, really interesting life.
Well, just all the stories that he talks about that he says that he personally experienced, and I'm like, all right, Salty. Okay.
Yeah, and I know they could be tall tales, but I like to believe that they're not. I think Salty, he has to have gotten all this from somewhere. I think he drops hints all the time that he's done really exciting things. Like, he's had this... You could do an amazing spin-off series on Salty. Like, the whole thing could just be about him going across the world before he came to Sodor. All the interesting events, all the hundreds and hundreds of engines that he's met, all the interesting things he's done, all the exciting adventures, how he's grown and learned to be who he is. How he's...
All the different liveries he must have had.
Yeah, he's probably been in tons of liveries. It's just like, it's an awesome thought. I'd like to think that Salty's been all over the place and had a really, really interesting past. And I mean, that's why I hate Salty All at Sea so much. Isn't that what it's called? Where it's the one where he, like, is afraid to sail. Like, he's afraid of the sea. He's afraid to get on a ship and travel somewhere because he's never been on the ship before. I call BS. I can't believe that Salty's never been on a ship. I think that episode just doesn't get what makes Salty so cool in the first place. It's that he's got this super interesting... And I know they're trying to subvert it, right? That's the point of it. However, it ruins him. It's like, it's such a shame that, like, they would do that. So I don't count that personally. That episode to me doesn't matter.
I do have an underappreciated episode for Salty, though.
Yeah?
Salty Surprise.
The one where Edward gets him a gift?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good one because I love that we get to see Salty green. It's like,
it's it has one of the best moments. I rewatched it to prepare for this. And it's the end scene where Salty's just retelling what Edward was trying to do to the other engines in story form. Yeah. And just loading him with praise and love. It's just so heartwarming. It's one of the best Salty moments in the show.
Yeah, I do adore that. It's such a sweet story because it's like, it just, in the way that he's so graciously, like, I think Edward's kind of ridiculous in that story because Edward doesn't, Edward would know what Salty would want, if anything. However, Salty in that story is just dead on. He's just awesome. I think, in general, the CGI series nails Salty. Gave him so much more than the model. Like, he was great in the model series, but the CGI series, he's just awesome. Yeah. Man. Like, that's a really, and this is kind of starting to feed into the design section a little bit, so we might just get there organically. However, I love Salty's voice in the CGI series. Like, I think that's perfect for him. He sounds perfect.
That's hits the nail on the head perfectly.
Yeah, no, I really just love how he sounds in that, and just his, and just generally he looks great in it. His design is great. His face is pretty close to the model series version, which isn't often true of CGI faces. But yeah, I definitely agree with that episode, as an underappreciated one, because I do really love how he acts in that. He's so gracious. He's like Edward keeps coming. Replace Edward with like Percy and you're golden. It's like, he keeps coming back to him with ideas, and he's just Salty doesn't really want anything. Like, you can tell that, but he doesn't say that because that would hurt his feelings. So instead, he's just like, I really appreciate it, but I don't want it. And
here's a story while we're at it.
Yeah, it's like, he gives a story every time. He's like, so patient, right? Every single time. He gives the exact same answer 3 times. And I know that's the 3 strikes thing, right? But I think it's exactly what he would do. I think he would respond the same way every time, and he would do it 10 times if he had to, because he's like, appreciates it. What he sees, he doesn't see, he doesn't think to himself, well, I don't know why Edward keeps coming back here. Doesn't he know that I don't want a gift by now? He thinks to himself, it's so nice that Edward cares so much about me that he wants to get me a gift. Like, that's how he's thinking. He doesn't, he's just really touched that Edward cares that much about him. And he feels that way every time. He'd feel that way forever, because he knows where Edward's coming from. That's what he cares about. And that's just so sweet. So I love that episode for that reason. And also seeing Salty green was great, because I think he actually was green in real life. Because I think Matt and I actually discovered this today, is that Salty's number 2991 was a real number on that class. And I think the engine is still around, which...
It's preserved.
Yeah, which is... I'm glad that an engine is preserved, but in the Salty context, it's kind of gross, because, like, now you've got the real-world timeline doesn't sync up with the Sodor one. Like, I'll give an example. Like, Toby is based on a real tram engine. Not just a real class, but literally in
the same way as Stepney and Flying Scotsman.
Yeah, like, Sodor People History and Railways tells us that Toby is actually based on a real engine that was scrapped around the same time he was bought. And so the idea is, in the real world, that engine's timeline ended. But in the Sodor universe, in the Thomas universe, where Sodor exists, that engine instead was bought by the Northwestern Railway and brought to Sodor. So then you don't have to get rid of 50 years of that engine's real world history. You don't have to.
But you kind of have to with Salty.
Yeah, you have to if you want him to come to Sodor in the 60s or 70s or whatever. Then you've got to get rid of the last 40 years that engine had, which is a shame, because real-world engines have really interesting histories, and I hate to just get rid of that engine's history. But everything prior to the 60s or 70s, which isn't much, because he was built in 1962, right? That's when he was built?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, now that we're hitting the design territory. Yeah, he was built in 1962.
Yeah, so he was built in 1962. We don't know when he showed up on Sodor, because we don't know when anything takes place. He could have showed up. I mean, I'm assuming, the thing is, he shows up after Oliver shows up. Not right after, but, like, definitely after. And Oliver arrives in 1967. Yeah, 1967. So because of that, I'm assuming Salty must have showed up after that, because there are characters there that arrived before him.
And the reason we know why he was built in 1962, by the way, is because he's a British Rail Class 07 diesel shunter.
Yeah, that's right.
And those were only built in 1962, and there were 14 of them built by British Railways.
And that's what Wikipedia tells us, so we're not positive, but that's the best we have. So
that's the best informed opinion we have.
Yeah. So that being considered, and that sounds about right for that diesel. So I would say 1962 is probably accurate. However, so we know he was built in 1962. I would like to give him a lot of time after he was built to come to Sodor. Like, if he arrived maybe in 1970 or something, then that way we've got a good 8 years he could bounce around. However, it's really up to the individual how they want to do anything with Salty, how they want to characterize him. How they want to... I mean, these are all just me and Matt's thoughts on what Salty's like.
It's great that all this is really so subjective.
Yeah, because, like, you can really... Like, I'm focusing on the parts I like the best about Salty. I could easily just make Salty All at Sea my basis, and then totally reverse everything I just said. So it's really about what episodes do you think are important. And for me, I think episodes like Salty's Stormy Tale are really important. Let's see, what else is there? So there's
livery.
The livery. So
I like the TV series livery.
I really like it as well. It's not a real livery. There are kind of liveries like that in real life.
Kind of reminds me. It's not gonna be that livery, but it kind of reminds me of the EWS. Livery, I think it is.
It does remind me of that. So basically, I don't think it's a real livery, and it definitely wasn't on the diesel that Salty is, which is 2991. But it's very close. Like the warning, really the only difference is change the blue or green of the body to red. And other than that, everything is pretty much the same. The warning panels are the same with the yellow and black hazard stripes, and so it is a fairly realistic livery. And I just always thought engines were repainted when they come to Sodor. Salty used to be green, and in fact he was probably green on Sodor for a little while because we see him green in the CGI series. And so I was thinking
on Sodor, and Salty specified that it was on Sodor.
Yeah, so it's like I'm thinking he was green for a little while before he was repainted. So maybe there was a brief period, maybe where he was still owned by BR, but being operated on Sodor by BR, because technically the Northwestern Railway was a region of British Railways. It's possible Salty was being operated there while BR still owned him, and that's why he was still green. And then once he was bought by the Northwestern Railway and properly allocated there, they repainted him to red. And that is the time when then he was sent to a Norfolk quarry to work there, and then eventually sent to Brendan. So it's possible you could have both. So it depends on how you arrange it. Maybe that takes place before Salty's Secret, and that's why he's like that. But anyway, so that's his. That's our thoughts on his livery, really. And engines look radically different in the TV series too. So I'm okay with Salty being a different shape in the show, maybe being a different color in the show. I mean, Great Western Green is bright green in the TV series rather than dark green. Tons of things are different, and I'm kind of okay with that as long as they're all consistent and make sense. I'll say that he is slightly differently shaped in the TV series. His engine compartment, kind of where, basically the things behind and in front of his cab, these engine compartments that end in yellow and black hazard stripes, in real life are a lot wider and also slope down a little bit on the sides. Generally, that's the main difference. Other than that, he's actually pretty close. I don't know how to justify him having like a little hat brim. It's a weird thing to put on a diesel. I like that, but it's like, that's a weird addition. Adding a face is one thing, but putting a hat on it is like a weird idea. Because the face can just kind of show up there due to the rules of the universe. But then the hat, it's like, did somebody put that there? I don't like that thought. That's like an uncomfortable concept in my mind. But, I like it, so, I'm not questioning it that much. I might at some point. But generally, I love Salty's design. He's really pleasing to look at. And he's got this scrappy look, and he's a very unique diesel class, too. I
like to separate his TV series appearance versus what I would have him look like in, say, my own content, because my own content, I would make him look as authentic to an 07 class, but I love his TV series design just because of the TV series itself.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, the TV series, I appreciate the TV series and my own ideal context of character design for different reasons, right? Like, personally, I like it when engines look like they do in the real world, because I think it's really cool that it's literally the same class as real life, because then you've got all this history from the real world that now applies to Thomas. You've got all this built-in story potential and all these built-in ideas that you can really relate to, because you can actually open a history book and read about the engines that you're writing about. And I think that's amazing. And so I like to follow that by having the engines. When I picture the engines in my head, they look like they do in real life, where they've generally got the same proportions as real life engines. And there might be slight differences, like maybe Salty has a few slight modifications on Sodor, but those modifications are accounted for. He was built as one of those original 1407s. And I like the fact that he fits into that real world storyline, that real world context. I think it's amazing. to have that, because that means Salty's real. In fact, he exists today. Technically, it's like going... if you were to go and see 2991 today, that's like walking into an alternate universe where Salty never went to Sodor. You're seeing Salty right there. Like, that's so cool. He's real.
That is really cool.
Like, it's like the same thing with, like, Flying Scotsman, is you're walking up to Gordon's brother. I mean, you're walking up to the Flying Scotsman. He's real. He exists. That's so cool. Like, the fact that it's real. It's as real as Thomas can get.
Yeah, it's not just Salty. It's Duck. It's Dennis. It's
yeah, everybody.
Neville.
A lot of characters are actual real numbers that engines had. Duck has been scrapped. Oliver's been scrapped. But they did once exist. Sorry, that's a downer.
That's the end of our show, guys. Duck and Oliver have been scrapped.
Oh my god.
We killed 2 of your favorite characters. Have Salty instead.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it really, so I love having the engines personally look more realistic. And so when I picture Salty in my head, I picture him with a little bit of a wider engine compartment. But I would still picture him with the TV series face, maybe even the hat brim, the same red color,
same livery.
But the thing is, he's pretty realistic already in the show. He's not that off. There's certain characters like Gordon that look radically different than they would in real life for a lot of reasons. But Salty, honestly, because of the era of the show he's in, that was later on in the show. They made the characters look a lot more realistic when they would design them. And Salty, well, he definitely has clear differences from a real world 07. He's honestly pretty close. And so I wouldn't change all that much about him, but I would change a few things to fit my personal ideal world of Thomas. However, I love the TV series version too. I love both of those versions because they each bring something different. And the TV series design is iconic, and I love how he's designed. I think he's a really cool looking character.
He's just so warm and fuzzy. Like, I'm looking at this picture. I've been just looking at pictures of Salty as we've been talking, and the one that has stuck out to me, and I'm looking at right now, is from Fish in season 8, where the trucks have just slammed into the back of him, and he's covered in fish. But he's just got this beaming smile on his face. He's happy.
At first, he's like, "Oh, what's going on?" But then once he realizes that it's happened already, and then Thomas is like, "Oh no, I'm sorry." It's like at that point, Salty's like, "Oh, it's fine. It reminds me of the sea." That's another great Salty moment. I love that moment. He's just like immediately comes up with a reason to totally forgive Thomas. He's like, "Don't worry about it, matey. It reminds me of the sea." It's like, he's immediately like, "No, it's fine. I like it." It's like all he's thinking about is making Thomas feel better in that moment. That's so sweet.
I guess that would be my leaving remark on Salty. It's just that he finds the best in every situation, everything, and everybody.
Exactly. He's an incredible optimist.
Yeah, he has an uncanny ability to just make everything around him just better.
Yeah, he's just got a great effect on everybody. Like, if he can pull Cranky out of his shell, he can do anything. He's one of the most positive influences on the whole island, I think. And sure, he has a limited influence on the world because he's at Brendam, but there are quite a few engines. I mean, every once in a while, Thomas and Percy will go down there. James sometimes. Donald and Douglas probably quite often. Even with Cranky being such a downer all the time, Salty brings this optimism to the place. And it really helps everybody around, and he makes everybody's lives better. So that's why I love Salty, and I think he's a fantastic character.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I think we've said our piece on Salty. I think we've hit every point we wanted to hit. Basically, that's our show. We've discussed Salty at length. I think we're good.
Don't take me away from the sea, boys! Don't take me away from the sea!
Well, that's our show. This is Hiro the Japanese Train.
And Master of the Lemons.
Signing off. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, thanks for listening.